Dustin shocked me because we were shooting a scene.
Yes, look, you're gonna have to.
Very sorry about this.
My wine glass was sitting there and he rushed it so that it whizzed by my nose and broke on the wall in little pieces of glass.
She's won 3 Oscars, earned over 20 nominations, and been called the greatest living actress of our time. But even Meryl Streep has her breaking point. Now, at 76, Meryl Streep is done staying silent. After decades of working with some of Hollywood's biggest names, she's finally revealed the 6 actors she hated working with the most. No more polite smiles or rehearsed answers. Meryl is naming names. From unbearable egos to on-set drama you never heard about, these are the co-stars who pushed her patience to the limit. You won't believe who made the list. Number 1. Dustin Hoffman. In 1979, Kramer vs. Kramer became the film that redefined courtroom drama, parenting, and the emotional fallout of divorce. But behind its Oscar-winning brilliance was a storm brewing between 2 acting titans. Meryl Streep, still a rising star, and Dustin Hoffman, already a Hollywood heavyweight, collided not just on camera, but behind the scenes in ways that would echo through decades. Their performances were electric, raw, vulnerable, unforgettable. But what the audience didn't see was the tension, the disrespect, and a series of deeply personal violations that turned a promising artistic partnership into a cold war of silence. It began from day one. Streep was new to film, still grieving the death of her fiancé John Cazale and trying to assert herself in a business that rarely offered patience. Hoffman, immersed in his method, didn't just blur the line between character and self, he bulldozed right through it. It was my first movie, and it was my first take in my first movie, and he just slapped me, Streep told the New York Times. You see it in the movie. It was overstepping. That slap wasn't scripted. It wasn't rehearsed. It was Hoffman trying to provoke a real emotional reaction. And it worked. The scene is unforgettable. But for Streep, the cost was personal. And that wasn't the only time Hoffman weaponized emotion. According to journalist Michael Schulman's unauthorized biography, Her Again. Becoming Meryl Streep, Hoffman also whispered John Cazale into her ear just before filming a pivotal courtroom breakdown, a cruel attempt to exploit the fresh pain of her real-life loss. Next time you do that, I'd appreciate you letting me know, Streep reportedly told Hoffman after he smashed a wine glass without warning her, sending shards flying. Cinematographer Nestor Almendros captured it best. Meryl operates like a precision instrument, every gesture, every vocal shift, calculated. Dustin treats scenes like jazz, unpredictable, chaotic. To Hoffman, spontaneity was art. To Streep, it was recklessness disguised as genius. Their philosophies clashed on every level. Director Robert Benton reportedly had to serve as peacekeeper on set, constantly diffusing tension. And while the result was one of the greatest performances in film history, winning both actors Oscars, the personal cost lingered. Hoffman never publicly addressed the slap. He's never acknowledged the glass incident. His closest comment came years later during a BAFTA tribute. I was getting divorced, I'd been partying with drugs. It depleted me in every way. It wasn't an apology, it was context. Maybe even a quiet excuse. Streep, for her part, eventually found closure. Decades later, while discussing her experiences in the post-press tour, she reflected on what had changed in the industry. Those things are being corrected in this moment, because people won't accept it anymore. That's a good thing. But perhaps the most surprising twist came in 2020. Appearing on Friday Night with Jonathan Ross, Streep softened. All is forgiven. I really, really love him, and I think he's an amazing actor. But boy, I was mad that day. It was the first public indication that Streep had fully moved on, not necessarily because Hoffman earned her forgiveness, but because time had tempered the rage, not erased the memory, not justified the action, but muted it. And yet the scar remains. not just as a footnote in Hollywood history, but as a reminder of the emotional labor women often bear silently in pursuit of greatness. Hoffman never paid a price for his actions. He continued working, celebrated, revered. Meanwhile, Streep transformed the pain into performance and became the gold standard of serious acting. Did their feud end? Publicly, yes. But they never worked together again. No reunions, no collaborations. Just that one haunting film and a legacy of what could have been, if respect had been part of the method. Because for Meryl Streep, art is sacred, but so is consent, and Dustin Hoffman crossed that line. Number 2. Kevin Kline. Meryl Streep builds characters like cathedrals, layer by layer, brick by brick, with the reverence of a scholar and the sensitivity of a sculptor. She doesn't enter a role until she's lived in its skin, studied its language, felt its historical heartbeat. Precision isn't a preference for Streep, it's a principle. So when Kevin Kline walked onto the set of Sophie's Choice in 1981 with his easy charm, improvisational rhythm, and offhand brilliance, it wasn't sparks that flew, it was friction. Director Alan J. Pakula had envisioned a dream pairing, two classically trained actors, steeped in the rigor of the stage, coming together to tell a harrowing Holocaust-era story. On screen, their chemistry was undeniable. Off-screen, it was a quiet clash of creative ideologies. Meryl had constructed Sophie from the ground up, production designer George Jenkins once said. Every accent variation and physical gesture emerged from months of historical research. Kevin seemed to be discovering Nathan through improvisation and instinct. For Streep, that instinct, however brilliant, felt unmoored. She had immersed herself in the trauma of Holocaust survivors, even studying Polish linguistic cadence down to the syllable. Kline, by contrast, flowed through rehearsals with a looseness that felt, to Streep, almost cavalier. The real breaking point came during one of their prep sessions, when Kline reportedly remarked that her intense accent work was so precise it's almost distracting. It wasn't a cruel comment, but to Streep, it cut deep. What you call distracting, I call essential, she reportedly fired back. I'm not here to play Sophie, I'm here to be her. From that moment, the boundary was set. What might have been a fruitful collaboration between equals became a balancing act of tolerance. On set, they were professional. Off set, they were polite. But the trust never fully formed. In later press interviews, Kline would reflect on Streep's process with a tone some found dismissive. Meryl's preparation is academic, he said. Brilliant, but sometimes it leaves less room for discovery. Streep didn't respond directly. She didn't have to. Her silence, her refusal to name him in praise throughout award seasons, and her strategic distance at industry events told the story. For her, that word, academic, wasn't an observation. It was a dismissal of everything she believed serious acting should be. Years later, when asked about their work together, Streep chose her words with surgical precision. Kevin is a wonderful actor. We just have very different ways of getting to the truth. She never elaborated. She didn't need to. Those who knew her craft understood the subtext. And those who had worked with her knew. Streep never forgets a slight, especially one that cuts at the foundation of her artistic integrity. Kline, for his part, has never issued a public apology or retraction. Perhaps he didn't see it as a feud. Perhaps for him it was simply two methods clashing in the chaos of creativity. But for Streep, it was more than a clash. It was a violation of sacred ground, the space where preparation meets performance, where history meets humanity. Kline's improvisational instincts may have electrified some scenes, but they left Streep feeling exposed, unsupported, and ultimately disrespected. They've never worked together again. In the decades since, both actors have taken the high road. No public jabs, no tabloid fodder. But the cold civility between them remains palpable in interviews and red carpets. Streep, the consummate professional, keeps her distance. Klein, equally composed, avoids mention of Sophie's choice unless prompted. Number 3. Jack Nicholson. Jack Nicholson, on the other hand, doesn't build characters. He channels them. He walks onto set with the swagger of someone who knows that charisma is the performance. He doesn't disappear into roles. He bends them toward himself. And to Meryl Streep, that wasn't just a difference in style, it was a breach of artistic integrity. Jack represents everything Meryl considers wrong with modern movie stardom, said casting director Juliet Taylor, who worked with both legends on separate projects. He's more interested in being Jack Nicholson than disappearing into characters. Their friction wasn't theatrical, it was ideological. It began in the 1980s, when both actors were at the peak of their power. Directors and studios dreamed of pairing them, but Streep, ever the craftswoman, hesitated. She reportedly declined multiple high-profile scripts that would have cast her opposite Nicholson. The reason? A quiet but firm skepticism that he'd ever put the story above the persona. That skepticism turned to discomfort when the two finally did work together in Mike Nichols' 1986 romantic dramedy Heartburn. Streep had just lost her original co-star Mandy Patinkin, fired after day one, and was blindsided when Nicholson stepped into the role. Since off-screen, Nicholson was charming, but also relentless. He flirted, he teased, he pressed personal boundaries in ways that, while never explicitly scandalous, made Streep bristle. She had to fend him off, revealed author Aaron Carlson in Queen Meryl, noting that Nicholson's behavior quickly turned from playful to persistent. On set, their styles clashed like oil and water. Streep brought months of emotional groundwork. Nicholson brought instinct and improvisation. While they never openly fought, their scenes were cold, mechanical, devoid of the trust that fuels great chemistry. Privately, Streep reportedly confided to Nichols that she felt Nicholson wasn't interested in the work, only in the spotlight. Years later, when asked about acting myths and public perceptions, she offered a veiled jab. Some critics categorically refuse to believe Santa Claus is their dad with a beard, that it really is the person, that Jack Nicholson is like Jack Nicholson. It wasn't just a comment. It was a scalpel. Streep was pointing out the cult of personality, the idea that performance alone could be genius, without process, without preparation, without craft. Nicholson, unsurprisingly, was unfazed. He once called method acting intellectual masturbation, mocking the very discipline Streep has built her legacy on. His tone wasn't angry. It was amused. "Acting's like sex," he said in a Rolling Stone interview. "You can't really talk about it without sounding like a fool. You just do it." That quote, to Streep, said everything. Their second collaboration, Ironweed, 1987, was less hostile, but no warmer. Though the film reunited them just a year later, the on-set relationship remained professionally distant. They showed up. They delivered. But the creative magic that should have sparked between two three-time Oscar winners never ignited. Over the years, both actors maintained public diplomacy. No barbed interviews, no on-stage confrontations, just absence. Streep never praised him in speeches. Nicholson never mentioned her in retrospectives. The feud, if one can call it that, never exploded. But it never healed either. There's no record of reconciliation. No joint appearances, no warm acknowledgments at awards shows. Just a silent, mutual understanding. They were never going to see the craft the same way. For Nicholson, acting was alchemy, a spontaneous, personal burst of energy. For Streep, it was architecture. Measured, intentional, and exacting. They were both right. And that's what made them wrong for each other. Today, Nicholson is largely retired, a recluse in Hollywood terms. Streep remains active, still delivering nuanced performances, still preparing with the same intellectual fire she always has. When asked about actors who prioritize persona over preparation, she doesn't name names, she doesn't have to. Because for Meryl Streep, some performances belong to history, and some to myth. And Jack Nicholson, for all his magnetism, never crossed from the latter into the former. "There is a craft," she once said. "Even in the most successful moments, the best actors still know what they're doing, deep inside. That's what separates performance from play." For her, that was the line, and Jack never stood behind it. Number 4. Alec Baldwin. In public, they laughed. On press tours, they danced around the tension. But behind the scenes of It's Complicated, Meryl Streep and Alec Baldwin were anything but effortless. Their chemistry on screen, flawless. Their actual collaboration, quietly volatile. For Meryl Streep, acting is architecture. Each role is mapped with painstaking detail, accent, posture, breath, intention. "She approaches comedy like a surgeon," said script supervisor Diane Dreyer. "Every laugh must emerge organically from character truth." Alec Baldwin? He's a hurricane. Fast, funny, instinctive, and impulsive. He thrives in spontaneity. On 30 Rock, he could riff through a scene in one take. But Streep isn't 30 Rock, and Baldwin's looseness clashed hard with her precision. "We were constantly trying to find the same rhythm," one crew member told Vanity Fair. "But they were dancing to different beats. Meryl was Mozart, Alec was Miles Davis." The friction showed during rehearsals. Baldwin frequently went off script, rewriting punchlines, rephrasing dialogue, even rearranging physical cues on set. Streep, who had crafted her character's emotional arc down to the breath, found herself derailed. Alec would change a line mid-take, and Meryl would just blink at him, like, "Really? Now?" one camera operator recalled. Her response was subtle but sharp. She requested more rehearsal time, asked for reshoots, and pushed to restore structure to scenes Baldwin had ad-libbed into chaos. What made it worse? Baldwin thought it was all part of the process. "Working with her was a dream come true," he later wrote on Instagram. "She's beautiful, she's brilliant, she's fun." But insiders say that was Baldwin's charm doing cleanup. On set, Streep was quietly exasperated. Not because Baldwin wasn't talented, she'd admired his work for years, but because his unpredictability forced her to compromise her process. She never called him out publicly. That's not her style. But she didn't hide her frustration either. "You do the work," she once said in an interview. "You build the truth from the inside. The rest is noise." To those who know her, that wasn't a generic comment. That was aimed at actors like Baldwin, those who rely more on charisma than construction. And Baldwin? He didn't seem to mind. In a press junket for the film, he joked, "She's a ball breaker, the Bette Davis of her generation. You don't walk on set unprepared with her, unless you want to get that stare." He meant it as praise. Streep didn't laugh. Yet despite the friction, they made it work. It's Complicated was a success, critically and commercially. But the collaboration was never repeated. No second film, no follow-up project, just polite interviews and public compliments, none of which masked the creative disconnect. Was there a feud? Not in the classic headline-grabbing sense. There was no shouting, no insults, no walkouts. But what existed between them was a professional chasm built on fundamentally different beliefs about what acting should be. To Baldwin, performance is play. To Streep, it's sacred labor. And for an actor who prizes structure, Baldwin's chaos wasn't refreshing, it was disruptive. They remain publicly cordial. They'll pose for photos, compliment each other in interviews, even exchange jokes when the cameras are rolling. But off-camera, Streep keeps her distance. "Meryl operates like an orchestra," said a crew member from It's Complicated. "If you're out of tune, she won't call you out, but you'll feel it." And Alec Baldwin? He continues to call the experience a career highlight. Perhaps not because it was easy, but because surviving it felt like an achievement. To this day, Streep has never requested Baldwin as a co-star again. and she never will. Number 5. Gwyneth Paltrow. To Meryl Streep, acting is a calling, a vocation rooted in discipline, obsession, and truth. It is not a performance for red carpets, brand deals, or curated interviews. It is sacred work. So when Gwyneth Paltrow waltzed onto the Hollywood stage in the late 90s, armed with lineage, poise, and a disarming ease, Streep didn't see a kindred spirit. She saw a warning sign. "She's charming," Streep once remarked to a peer during a roundtable, "but charm isn't the work." That wasn't a dig. It was, for Streep, an indictment. The friction didn't come from a single explosive moment. It wasn't backstage tantrums or screaming matches. No, this was colder, more surgical. A quiet feud defined not by insults, but by silence. When Paltrow won the Academy Award for Shakespeare in Love in 1999, there were audible gasps in some corners of the Dolby Theater, not for the win, but for what it seemed to symbolize. Meryl Streep had delivered a more technically demanding performance that year in One True Thing, and many in the industry assumed she'd walk away with the statue. Instead, she watched Paltrow sob her way through a speech that, to Streep, may have said more about celebrity momentum than artistic merit. "It felt like the Oscars were voting for the next fashion icon," one longtime Academy member confessed. Not the best actress. Behind the scenes, Streep said little, but her silence spoke volumes. She didn't publicly congratulate Paltrow. She didn't reference the win in interviews. And more tellingly, she avoided sharing panels, events, or stages where Paltrow was also scheduled. A few years later, in an interview with The Guardian, Streep was asked about the state of young Hollywood. Her reply was surgical. "I worry that we're entering an age where performance is mistaken for presence, where the real work gets lost under the spotlight." Critics and insiders read between the lines and saw Paltrow's reflection. Even Alec Baldwin, who had worked closely with both actresses, once quipped, "Meryl memorizes the phone book. Gwyneth memorizes the vibes." The remark, said jokingly during a dinner party, reached both women. Streep reportedly responded with a curt smile. Paltrow didn't. According to one former Miramax publicist, Paltrow was devastated by what she perceived as quiet rejection. "She always wanted Meryl's approval," the source said. "She grew up hearing her name in the same sentence as Meryl's. But once she got close enough, she realized Meryl wasn't interested in passing the torch." For Streep, the issue wasn't personal. It was philosophical. She saw Paltrow as part of a generation that prioritized fame over form, privilege over preparation. And it wasn't just about acting. Paltrow's pivot to lifestyle branding and her now infamous Goop empire only widened the chasm. "It's like watching an actress turn into a fragrance," one of Streep's collaborators whispered during a roundtable. Still, Streep never attacked her directly. That's not how she operates. Instead, she praised actresses like Cate Blanchett, Saoirse Ronan, and Florence Pugh, women known for disappearing into roles, not dominating headlines. When asked about Paltrow's work in Proof, a film that was meant to mark her return to serious drama, Streep dodged elegantly, "I think the film had strong intentions. Not strong performances, not Gwyneth did well, just intentions. As for Paltrow, she's been more vocal, though always coded in diplomacy. Meryl is